Hey there, and welcome into Maybe I'm the Crazy One podcast. And I'm your host, Alex Chandler. Never being one to share a take with anyone I know, I figured I'd start by taking down my ideas and sharing them here. Every week, we will explore parts of the sports world, and I'll give you my viewpoints. Maybe I'm a genius, maybe I'm just crazy. Tune in with me and find out for yourself. What up, guys, and welcome in. It is episode 15. I am your host, Alex Chandler. Thanks for being here with me today, guys. I'm so excited. We have a great show for you guys today. There was some incredible football that was put on this display this weekend. A lot of starters played, a lot more than I anticipated. Baker Mayfield was announced as the starting quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, which we told you would happen back when he was traded there, even before he was traded there. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. We'll talk about how bad the Broncos were destroyed, but why, and also like how that is going to be perceived on the other side as they played the Bills, and the Bills also didn't play Josh Allen. So we'll get into that. We'll also break down a little bit of every other game just so we hit all topics. But today we also had some pretty breaking news happen. KD deciding to stay in Brooklyn, which is, I think, something that we've discussed on this show a couple times. And, you know, at one point I said, I think that this is not going to go anywhere and KD is going to end up in Brooklyn. And it's a matter of if he's going to play for him or if he's not going to play for him. So we're there now. He's going to stay in Brooklyn, it sounds like, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. And then also we'll touch on LeBron re-signing with the Lakers, how important that is not only for LeBron, but also for the organization. So all of that. We will also touch today on college football. I will give you a preview, or what I believe will look like, what I believe the playoff picture will look like at the end of the season. So all of that and more. Of course, we got to start off. Let's make sure that we are liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, posting, whatever you want to do. We're trying to get the name out there. We're still growing. We're doing a great job. We're on pace for our next milestone. So I'm excited to share that all with you all once we get there. But I do need your help. So if you could get us there, I would greatly appreciate it. Additionally, we are going to start having some guests on this show more frequently. It's something that seems to be garnering a lot of attention. If you haven't heard our guest spots, make sure you go listen to our debate discussion with Ben, as well as the back and forth that Trevor and I put on last Friday as we discussed the preseason. So with all of that being said, I appreciate you being here. And let's go ahead and get started with the day. So as we discussed in last week's episode, because of the fact that our schedules needed to align and add up, Trevor and I recorded Thursday night during the Bears and Seahawks game. And kind of what we saw during that game was that Justin Fields played well, the Bears defense played well, and Geno Smith didn't play all that great. So that is interesting. Drew Lock getting COVID and missing that game seems to be really interesting. Maybe Drew comes out in week 3 and wins that job. I don't think it's a good job for either one of them to win, but somebody's got to win it, and I think Drew's going to get a chance this week to see if he can, get the job away from Geno, or else the quarterback from West Virginia is going to be the starter going into the regular season. So either way, it's not a good look for Seattle. That game was really boring. Next game played was Carolina and New England. And in that game, ironically, even though Baker was named the starter, Sam Darnold and Baker both didn't play. And so what that looks like for them is that they said, we don't even need to see Baker play this week. We anticipate Baker being the starter going forward. He has already gained and shown a control of the offense that Sam didn't have. And so P.J. Walker and Matt Corral started and played that game, and so they ended up losing 20-10 to the New England Patriots. Mac Jones' offense looked better than it did in week 1, but ultimately Bailey Zappi also just outplayed him again. Bailey Zappi did have an interception that Mac didn't have, but ultimately Bailey, he played majority of the game, so of course his stats are going to look better than what Max did. But overall, in actual gameplay as well, Zappi looks more comfortable. Next game was Green Bay and New Orleans. This was Jordan Love's second crack at the NFL this season. Of his expected 3 cracks, because we don't anticipate him playing in the regular season. So, with that being said, he didn't have any turnovers this time. The team did win 20-10. He played better against New Orleans. We got to see what happens. Ian Book was their offense for New Orleans on Saturday, and so I don't know, or Friday. So I don't know how much of that proponent was, them as much as it was the Saints just being inept right now. So, next game on Friday was Houston and Los Angeles. Again, nothing to write home here. Los Angeles isn't playing anybody of importance. Houston is Houston. Houston did win the game, but other than that, Lance McCutcheon seems to be coming on as a real player. If you're a fantasy guy, look at him deep in your drafts. He might end up being their go-to guy on the outside until OBJ is healthy and they re-sign him, or they go out and get somebody else. Which then brings us to Saturday. Which Saturday, there's a bunch of games that happened. It was Buffalo hosting Denver, Detroit traveling to Indy, Washington going to Kansas City, Tampa going to Tennessee, the Raiders going to Miami, San Francisco going to Minnesota, Pittsburgh going to Jacksonville, Dallas going to the Chargers. All of those games were played on Saturday. And Buffalo, Detroit, Kansas City, Tennessee, Las Vegas, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, and Dallas all won. The best performances of the day obviously go to a lot of backups here, but it was Case Keenum had the best passing day. That offense in Buffalo also scored 42 points against Denver's 15. And you can tell me all you want about how they're starting, trying to figure out their second, third, and fourth stringers. I don't care. Your second, third, and fourth stringers are also playing second, third, and fourth stringers with the Bills. And so if the Bills are blowing the brakes off of you with their second stringers against your second stringers, I don't think the disparity between your first and second string is going to be leaps and bounds higher than the Bills' second to first string. And so in that regard, like, anything happens in an NFL season, which you're guaranteed to have, something happen to your team almost assuredly, I think it's ridiculous to think that the Broncos are going to be good this year if they can't even get within 10 points in a preseason game. Detroit gets another win against Indy this time. Sam Ehlinger played better than he did last year, and so that was a decent game for him. The biggest thing about that game is that Desmond Patman had 103 yards. And so is he going to be something, or is he just a preseason guy? We'll see what ends up happening there. Patrick Mahomes was almost perfect again for the Chiefs in almost a half of football. He orchestrated 2 touchdown drives rather quickly. That game was still, I think it was 17-7 at halftime, if I remember correctly. There was a good game going on there. Taylor Heineke played more than Carson Wentz, but that was more of a product of the offense. He was only going X amount of series, and so Carson still had a good game. Sam Howell was also excellent for Washington, so keep an eye on that for them as well going forward in case Carson Wentz ends up not being their guy or they decide to move on from him. Next, we had the Tampa and Tennessee game. Tampa had Kyle Trask, and they don't even know if Kyle Trask is the guy. He might be cut this week, and so it'll be really interesting to see if they decide to keep him, because right now he's losing the job as a backup quarterback to Blaine Gabbert. Blaine Gabbert, guys. That's who is the backup quarterback right now for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Brady just came back to practice today, so there should be nothing, no problems here, no qualms. They should be moving on. Las Vegas. Guys, I know Tua was a first-round pick. I know Tua probably is better than what he's been given credit for in Miami. But they might have a stud on their hands in Miami and Skylar Thompson. I know it was against second and third string guys. He played the mop-up minutes. Tua started. Teddy Bridgewater got some snaps in as well, right? But listen to this. Skylar Thompson, 9 for 10, 129 yards, and a touchdown with a 152 rating. And they lost 15-13. When he came into the game, they were losing 12-0. I mean, he can't win it all. He's got to have some help here too, but he came out and he balled, and that's the second straight preseason game he's came out and been excellent. So let's keep an eye on that. There's a chance that Skylar Thompson is backing up Tua at one point this season, and then Teddy Bridgewater is the third string / inactive guy by the end of the season. So keep an eye on that. I think there might be something brewing there, especially if they start having trouble and struggling. If the team is out of contention and Skylar's still on the roster, absolutely look for Skylar Thompson to get some looks, because he at this point he's earned them in this preseason run. San Francisco at Minnesota. San Francisco wins that game, led by Brock Purdy. That's about all I got for you. It was a very boring game. Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett is a really interesting story right now. He seems to be getting more comfortable and looking more and more like a NFL quarterback. And that's not surprising to me because he's with the Steelers, but it is surprising to me because he's Kenny Pickett. So, let's see how he actually plays against live competition. But he has a really good shot at this point, when it was an outside shot to start training camp, that he would be overtaking Mason Rudolph or Mitch Trubisky, as the starting quarterback for this season. So that was interesting. They ended up winning the game, but most of the statistics are won by Jacksonville. So it was ultimately a really good game, I think, and both teams would be really happy with the showing that they got. Jacksonville, of course, would say, I want to win a game, but, it is what it is. And then the Dallas Cowboys played the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Cowboys won 32-18. Again, this means nothing. None of the Chargers starters started, and, this game didn't matter. You played vanilla defenses. I don't think Dallas is that good. I'm going to keep saying it. I'm until they prove me wrong. I do not think they are good enough to make the playoffs right now. So then that brought us to Sunday and Monday. There was 4 games left. The Eagles beat the Browns. The Giants pulled off a win against the Bengals, and Baltimore continued their win streak of 22 games now in a row in the preseason, or 21 games in a row straight that they've won. So, again, Kyler called plays in the fourth quarter. There's questions if he used his own personal gaming headset to call plays. I personally don't care. He did show a better command of the offense on the sideline in this game, because in the fourth quarter they scored 14 points. How much of that is his play calling versus Trace McSorley doing better, or even the being down 24-3 and ended up losing 24-17. So maybe it's just the other team didn't care that much because it was a preseason game. Who really knows? They're going to be an interesting team to watch all year. Even if they're 4-10, they're going to be a dumpster fire, a train wreck, runaway train, whatever you want to call it. They're going to be something fun to watch. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on, and I think that's easily what was the most exciting game from yesterday. Gardner Minshew, and the Browns quarterback. It wasn't Brissett. It was another guy. They played well. And then Davis Webb played well and out of his mind, frankly, for the Giants. So ultimately, those 3 games happened on Sunday. And then on Monday, the Jets won the game, but Desmond Ridder had some really nice throws for the Falcons as they lost 24-16. Also, there was a huge connection between Mariota and Pitts. So a lot of things happened. It's a lot of fun down in Atlanta. I just don't know how much they can win. So ultimately, it was an interesting weekend. What we got was Baker Mayfield became the starter. I think we saw something from Jordan Love that, we wanted to see in steps moving forward. I think it's interesting that Denver is really bad on defense, it seems. And that even if it's second or third string guys, again, I don't think the disparity is that high. And so they're really bad. Patrick Mahomes is showing that it doesn't matter who who he's throwing to, he's going to get it done. The 49ers defense looks like it's to be stout. However, again, not a lot of starters played for the Vikings. Tua kind of struggled, but Skylar Thompson is killing it for the Dolphins. Jalen Hurts didn't play, but Gardner Minshew looked excellent for the Eagles as they beat the Browns. And then, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis scored another touchdown this week. It was the only touchdown that the Titans scored, so good for him. He was a little bit more inaccurate with the football, though, so we'd like to see that change. But other than that, he played a pretty good game. It was a really good weekend of football. While on Friday we discussed there wasn't a lot of great games going on, there was a lot of important games that could have ended up happening and shaping rosters. Going into this week, teams had to cut down to 80 players from 90, so they had to get rid of at least 10 players up to this point. You could only go up until, I think, Thursday is the deadline. It might be today, it might be Thursday. I can't exactly remember that date. However, they have until then to get down to 80, and then next week they got to get back down to 53. So we got a little bit of time to see who makes these final rosters. There was a story today that Kenyon Drake expects to be cut by the Raiders. So that will be another running back on the market for a backup running back. There is some belief that Ronald Jones might get cut from the Chiefs. So just keep an eye out on some of those moves, because then there will be some corresponding moves that other teams will make to add, some of these surprise cuts, if you will. So that is what our week in football looked like last week. Now, traditionally speaking, week 3 was used, or the last week of the preseason was always used for, your no names to basically fill out the rest of the roster. And there's belief around the league that the teams are going to use the first preseason and the third preseason games to really figure out their starters. And so there's a belief around the league that a lot more starters will play this week in week 3 to ensure that the team is, tuned up to play. Additionally, since there is that additional week, the week 4 of the preseason exists, it's just no games are played there. Because of that, between the last day that the last preseason game is, which is the 28th, and the first day of the season, which is the 8th, there's almost 2 weeks that pass in between that time without playing a live game. And so if you let your team play that last week of the season, or the preseason, that is, it at least lets them try to stay fresh. But if you let them play, only week 2 or week 1, they're not playing football for almost a month in game speed abilities. So I think that's really important. And I think that we're going to see a lot more starters. I think we're going to have more of a concrete idea of who is going to at least start the season hot versus start the season cold. The only thing that we won't really know is the defensive effort and ability. However, if teams are winning games and showing quality defense currently in the preseason with vanilla defenses, then I anticipate they're going to continue. But we'll talk about some of those games coming up on Friday as we preview week 3 of the preseason, what we anticipate being the big games, the big big storylines, what we expect, and then ultimately recapping the week next week. So I'm excited to look forward to that already. And we'll move on to our next topic. We'll talk a little bit about basketball, and then we'll head back into football with some college football. But first, we got to talk about the 2 biggest stars right now, or at least 2 of the biggest stars, along with Steph Curry, Luka, and Giannis, and Kevin Durant and LeBron. So this week, LeBron and KD both decided that they were going to stay with their concurrent teams. And they're both now under contract for at least 3 more years. LeBron signed a 2-year extension worth up to, I think it's $123 million if the cap were to increase high enough. And, Kevin Durant obviously deciding to go back to Brooklyn. But I don't think either move truly keeps them stuck where they are. And I'll explain both. So let's start with KD's move because it's the more logical, straightforward, linear thinking process used to get there. So KD is kind of pulling the same stunt that we see a lot of players in the NFL do, where they'll request a trade, come back to their team, And then in the offseason the next year, their team is able to trade them as if, the previous trade request didn't exist. So the best example of that right now is Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson last year demanded a trade, or didn't demand, I guess, but he asked for a trade away, and here are the 4 teams that I'll go play for. It was the Raiders, the Broncos, and 2 other teams, because I don't remember at this time. But he ended up coming back to the team. He got hurt. He played 14 games last season, and then left this offseason via trade. And I think KD could do a lot of the same stuff here. What KD basically came out and said is, hey guys, I want to be out of here. And they said, well, Kevin, it's not feasible. We can't find a trade partner for you, Kevin, because everybody who's offering us stuff believes you don't want to be here. They believe that the entire team is about to blow up. And so why would they trade us anything of value for you when they think we're going to fold? And so this will carry on into the season. And if you're wanting to be traded, that's fine, but you won't be able to play for us. And Kevin Durant was probably like, well, I want to play. And they were like, okay, well then let's do this. Let's run it back one more year. See what we can do with the new options and new pieces that we've added around us and everybody we're bringing back. And if we don't win this year, I will gladly, on July 1st or whenever free agency opens next year, I will promptly trade you to your desired destination, as now your team will know that you are, the radar is open. Kevin wants to potentially leave Brooklyn. It's no longer, the best spot for him unequivocally. And they can start freeing up cap space. They can start making these moves to try to make a more permanent home for you. At that point, he'd be 35. I don't know who really wants to pay a 35-year-old $55 million a year, but that's their prerogative, not mine. LeBron's about to make $61 million a year, year 24. So, what can we really say? And that's the other part of this is with LeBron, what it does is it gives him the security, but what it really does is it shows free agents that, hey, LeBron's always been a little wishy-washy, right? He's was in Cleveland, then in Miami, then back to Cleveland, now in LA. And so, he likes to jump teams, and he's always told us that he likes to keep it on the 1-and-1 deal. And last time he didn't do a 1-and-1 deal, which is what he did again this time, was a 2-and-1. So he did not do his typical 1-and-1. He's always gotten screwed. So it will be interesting to see what the Lakers do, but typically with financial security with your superstar, that sometimes brings an additional edge when it comes to getting your free agents to join the team. And so what that may do for them is it may open up some of these mid-level players, role guys, bench guys that can perform a certain job function on the team. It opens them up to come over, potentially play for less money because LeBron is there. LeBron is always going to be there. LeBron's not leaving. Before, you could have potentially been going to the Lakers without LeBron. That team's very bad. But that team with LeBron has title aspirations. And so them locking him up is good for him, not only for the flexibility and security that he has financially, which, to be fair, he doesn't need it. He's a billionaire. But, it is nice to have that. And, at this point, it is not unlikely that he'll retire a Laker, which is also, I think, really important to the Lakers. Now, neither one of their contracts will hold them where they are next year, though, because they're still going to be 2 of the top 10 players in the league, and when you're a top 10 player in the league, you basically get what you want. I want everybody to recognize here, the Nets and Durant didn't mutually agree to move forward and continue, like the press conference said. No. Kevin Durant decided that they were going to go ahead and continue to move forward. Now, you can be like, well, Joe Tsai could have wanted to trade him. It's his team. He can do what he wants. Yeah, but he's not going to, because you don't just willy-nilly trade a top 5 talent of all time. And so, with that being said, he wouldn't have traded him. That doesn't make any sense. And, so they're not moving on this same path. They didn't mutually agree to do that. Kevin said, it's fine. I'll give you one more year. We'll try it out and see what happens. And you know what my belief is? I think Kevin Durant's going to ball out this year. I think he's going to be healthy. He's going to play 71 games. Plus, I think he might have a chance at winning MVP because I think he's angry. But ultimately, I don't think that team's good enough to win enough basketball games, and so they flame out in the second round, maybe the conference finals. And then we're back in the same spot next year. Kevin Durant's probably looking for a new team, and I guarantee he probably gets it then. One thing that I also guarantee this year is that we're going to be really upset at the end of the year when it comes to parity in college football. One reason I don't want to talk about college football too often, but also why I understand people do want to, is because it's so top-heavy when it comes to who's the winners. And that's why I think that my personal realignment would be excellent, because it gives more fan bases belief that they're actually winning something valuable. And if you don't remember that, please go back out and check our episode on that. There's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of teams that move around, but it was a great episode. But right now, just looking at the preseason top 25, it's Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, Notre Dame, Texas A&M. This is the top 6 teams probably the last decade. Those 6 teams right there, right? Then you get Utah and Michigan, who have been better, as of recent, but are still incredible football programs and great schools. Oklahoma's next, Baylor, Oregon, or Oklahoma State. NC State is the first true surprise to me, is NC State being at 13. That's pretty high. But they also had a really good end to last season, so maybe they think they're going to capitalize on that. USC, Michigan State, Miami, Pittsburgh, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Wake Forest, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU. That's not surprising to me. Receiving votes: Tennessee, Iowa, Texas, Penn State, K-State, Auburn, LSU. All these teams received votes. But what's really interesting to me is that a team that made the college football playoff in Cincinnati, granted they got destroyed, but they made the playoff nonetheless, and is 23rd. I think that's pretty disrespectful, especially since they do play in the AAC versus the Big 12, where they are going to move to, and that's the only reason you do that. That's really the only reason. You expect that the players that they lost Sauce Gardner, they lost Desmond Ridder. Outside of that, they have an incredible team still. So they should still be a really good football team. And if Fickle had done what he was supposed to do there, which I believe he did, then they're going to be fine. So I don't think there's any problem with Cincinnati. They're going to be an excellent club again. I think they could still be a top 10 school. And it's a shame that they got to move forward the way that they do and have to climb the ranks. But I think it will be okay. There's a lot of SEC and ACC teams and Big 10 teams in here, but not a lot of Big 12 teams or Power 5 schools. You have I think there's only 2 Pac-12 schools as well in Utah and USC. Oh no, Oregon was in there as well. So sorry, 3 teams from the Pac-12. Ooh, cool. So here's what I think. Do I think Georgia sustains against Alabama in the SEC? I do not. History tells us when Alabama loses the SEC one year, they then come back and win it the next year. It's insane how consistent Coach Saban and that Alabama team are. Will Anderson is going to be high on the Heisman voting list as a defensive player this year, so that will be something interesting to watch. Bryce Young will be an incredible talent as well. Of course, they reload at receiver every single year, so this year will be no different. Their defense is always stacked because Nick is a defensive guy. So I think Alabama is on on paper. There's no reason why Alabama can't go 15-0 this year and win a title. Which is the same thing for Ohio State with C.J. Stroud. Almost the exact same conversation we can have. The only reason that they would be the second best team as opposed to Alabama is because it's Ryan Day versus Nick Saban. Nick's been doing this for the better part of 2 decades now. Ryan's been a head coach for 3 years. So I think or 4 years maybe. But, I think Ohio State's an incredible club. I think Michigan, of course, is their biggest rival and, the biggest threat to their success in college football playoff run. However, I think Ohio State gets it done this year. Michigan hasn't won back-to-back games against Ohio State in a while, and so I don't think it happens this year. I think Ohio State wins, and they win the Big Ten, and then move on to the Super Big Ten next year, and move forward. Going forward, we'll see how they do, but this will be the last iteration of this, the Big Ten as it is, and so Ohio State wins the last iteration of the regular Big Ten, and of course makes the college football playoff. Now Georgia. The question is do they lose more than one game or do they lose multiple games? And I think the fact that they are going to be in a situation where they have to play the likes, let's do this. Let's look at their schedule and you tell me if they really can go undefeated. So they start off against Oregon, who, as we said, was 11th. Then they go to Samford. They're at South Carolina and Kent State and Missouri. Those 4 games are home away. Then they go against Auburn, Vanderbilt, Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Georgia Tech, which is a rivalry game. Those last 5 games on the season, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Tennessee, and Florida, are going to be really challenging games for them. And then they still have to then go and win the SEC tournament game, or championship game, which would either be against more than likely Alabama or A&M. I just don't see them doing it, guys. And so if they're not doing that, then they can't be in the college football playoff, because I don't think that we're going to be in a spot where they can lose a game to one of those teams on that list, minus Oregon maybe, and it be okay. I recognize Kentucky is ranked 20th in the country right now. I don't know if a loss to Kentucky would be seen the same as a loss to Oregon, versus like an Alabama or a larger level or highly regarded school. So I think if they lose one game, definitely if they lose 2 games on that schedule, they're not moving on to the college football playoff. And so I'm gonna hedge my bet here and say they don't make it. And so then we go to Clemson. I think they might be done. I know that Dabo is Dabo, and it might just be a bad year for them last year. It was a really bad year for them in terms of who they are as Clemson. So putting them at 4th, I think that's ridiculous. I know they had a good recruiting class. I got to see it in action first. I don't even care if you would have put them at like 10th and moved them up to 4th after seeing them actually play football. But based upon their performance last year, I don't think they did enough to get up to 4 this year. Do they get to the college football playoff? This is where this matters, where they place them now. While this doesn't directly indicate, college football playoff seeding, the first 8 weeks of the season, before they start introducing those things, it all goes off of these rankings, and this is how we determine strength of schedule. And so this does play into it in that regard, and so them being the 4th best team in the country right now, that starts your eye at the 4th best. Now, last year, the committee did show the ability to put the best teams in those positions. Didn't matter what the rankings said. They decided that we're going to move teams up and down based upon what we believe their merit is, and I think that's the right way to go. And so, does Clemson get in? The ACC is tough, and I think they lose more than one game overall, and so I don't think they get in, which then leads us to Notre Dame, who would be the 5th seed, or moving up at this point would be the 3. I think there's too many moving parts. Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame is going to create some kind of rift. Whether they replace him with an excellent coach as well, so there's no problem there. And I understand he was on the staff prior to this season. There is a difference. Like as much as cringeworthy material that Brian Kelly is out of LSU right now, but he was still a really good coach. He was a good coach at Cincinnati, and he was a good coach at Notre Dame. He'll be a good coach at LSU more than likely. It's hard to replace, really good coaches, and I think that's what they're going to be trying to do this year. I don't trust it. Texas A&M, I think they're going to lose to Alabama. They won't even win their own conference. They're their own division in their conference, so I don't think they can be in it. Utah is an interesting one because the Pac-12 is so weak. And so this is where we start to look at, 3 versus 4, maybe even a Power 5 school. being entering that conversation, right? And so it's your Utahs, your Michigans, your Oklahomas, Baylors, and Oregon. I think Utah versus Oregon, if they both can go undefeated outside of the game that they play each other, one of them has a chance. I think they do. And, they would play each other in the conference championship game as well. And so that's another thing to think of is, if they play a close game that in that conference championship game, does that mean anything? Or does one team have to blow the other out since it is the Pac-12 and they do have, weaker schedules? They would play 2 times in 3 weeks because they play the second to last week of the season, at least Utah's season, to the point, and it's in Autzen, in Oregon. And so what if Utah loses that game to Oregon, but then beats them on the neutral ground in the championship game? There's a lot of things to think about there. I'm not entirely certain who would do what, but I think between the two of them, my money right now is actually on Oregon being the more likely team to be in the college football playoff than Utah, and it's really just based upon, perception. So Oklahoma won't do it. Baylor will fail. Michigan won't do it. Oklahoma State won't do it because the committee does not like the Big 12, and the Big 12 is not good enough to be this good. NC State is an interesting one, but I think they're going to fall victim to the same problems as Clemson. And so then we get to the next team that has a chance, and I think it's USC. They're interesting to me. So Lincoln Riley, I think, is a really good coach, and I think Caleb Williams can be a really good quarterback. But with them being there for the first year of the program, how much impact can they actually have? How much of it is scheme? How much of it is building the culture and building up the base? And so now they are USC. And while I just said I give Oregon the better chance to make the college football playoff than Utah, I give USC the best chance. USC has so much history, so much success, and so much in terms of it being a school in LA, Southern Cal, that, in and around that area, it's a celebrity school. Let's call it what it is. And so the fact that when they're good, it's best for college football. If they're a 10-1 team, 12-1 team, whatever it ends up being at the end of the season, them versus Oregon, who do you put in? I put in USC. They're a bigger ticket item. I think they have the best shot of any Pac-12 school. So, all that being said, what do I see being our Final Four this year? Well, I have Alabama as your 1, Ohio State as your 2. I think that's very clear. I think our 3 is going to be USC. I really do. I think they're going to have a great season. I trust Lincoln Riley. I think they're going to be great. I think he's going to end up doing well. If they go undefeated, I could even see them fighting Ohio State for that 2 seed. But I think Alabama's going to hold on to the 1 for the whole season, and I think it's not even going to be close. So that leaves the 4. And I'm going with Houston. And here is why. Houston was a great football team last year. Houston has a great tradition of winning more than 8 games in a season year over year over year over year. I think Houston continues to get better as a program as well. That's, and it's imminent that they're going to be moving to the Big 12, which is huge for them, and that would have done a huge boost for the recruiting, because those kids that they'd be recruiting to be freshmen this year will be juniors, the year that they joined the Big 12. And so that's going to be great exposure for them. It's an excellent recruiting chip. On top of that, they play in a softer schedule because they are still in one of those conferences. They got on the board. One of those group of 5 conferences, that is. So they got on the board. Cincinnati set the precedent last year that you can have a great team, have great wins, and get to the college football playoff. And they got on the top 25 board to start the season, which is critical for them. They're going to be playing against a couple Big 12 schools, Texas Tech and Kansas. And so if they win those 2 games, they'll be in great spot. SMU has been really good the last few years, as has Memphis. So if they can win those games, those are good games. They also don't have a low end side when it comes to what they have the ability to offer. On the schedule, like they do play Navy or Southern Florida, Temple, East Carolina, schools like that, and of course Tulsa and Rice. But like the bottom of their schedule is not terrible. It's just at the top of their schedule is also not terrible. But I could see them easily going undefeated through their entire schedule, which would then prompt a lot of the same questions we had from Cincinnati. That do we put them in? The thing that I think gets them in is that I don't think that the teams that will be behind them will, 1, be conference champions, or 2, have more than 2 losses. Because I think the Big 12 is really hard this year. Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Kansas State are 5 schools that could potentially win 9+ games this year. And they got to play each other. So I don't think any of them really win over 10 games. And that doesn't even include Texas Tech, TCU, Kansas should be better this year. Iowa State, who has been on and off, but when they have good play, they're a good team. So that doesn't even include them, or West Virginia, who we haven't even talked about at all. And so I think the Big 12 is hard. I don't think you can have a Big 12 champion. Just like we talked about with the Big 12 just now, the ACC is also going to be really packed. You got Pitt, you have Clemson, NC State, Miami, just to name a few teams. Not to mention, Virginia Tech and Virginia are still schools in the ACC. Florida State's still in the ACC. Georgia Tech, ACC school as well. So there's a lot of really good football being played in those 2 conferences, top to bottom, that it's hard for me to see either one of those conferences having a team that's better than 10-2. And so I don't think that you can be in the playoff when you're 10-2 and there's a team that's beaten teams from your conference that you may have beaten as well, but they also beat them and are undefeated and a champion. And so because of that, the only other team I could see doing it is Notre Dame. If only they maintain. Otherwise, we're looking at somebody else rising to that 4th spot. That isn't somebody that we would expect it to be a power school. Could it be a Michigan State? Could it be a Wisconsin? Maybe. But that would also then mean that Ohio State would more than likely have 1 loss. And so then do we move Ohio State out? Where do they move down to? Do they go down to the 4? Do you want to see Ohio State, Alabama week 1 of the the playoff? Or do you want to see it for the championship game? So do you put them at 3? That's a really good question. But so far, what I am telling you I see is Alabama versus Houston and Ohio State versus SC or USC. And then I think USC plays Alabama for the title and Alabama wins it. So there's the skinny on that. I think your 5, your Power 5 schools, I think you're going to have Alabama win the SEC. I think you will have, I think you're going to have NC State actually win the ACC. I think you're going to have USC win the Pac-12. I think you're going to have Ohio State win the Big Ten. And I think we're going to see Texas win the Big 12. And so with that, we recapped the preseason week 2. We talked about NBA contracts for 2 superstars. And we broke down the entire college football season for all of the big schools that are, currently listed in the top 25, and then a couple other ones that aren't. So, as well as all 5 major conferences, and talked a little bit about non-Power 5 schools. If you've made it to this point in the podcast, I want to say once again, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of the love, support, and just commitment to being here with us every single time that we record twice a week. I do appreciate it. I do try to put on the best show that I possibly can for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and post about us. We are trying our best to get up to 20 subscribers, or not 20 subscribers, but 20 listeners, active listeners per episode by our 20th episode. We are so close to being there, guys. Just need a little bit more push, and I need a little bit more drive and effort. or not effort, but help from you guys if you don't mind, please. And so many thank yous. And then also, just let me know, am I a genius or am I just crazy?